Hi, Jocelyn here from CrossFit Brio Plus Nutrition. Today I had the privilege of visiting a local high school to teach their advanced phys ed class about nutrition. I'm going to share with you some of what I showed them today. The first question I like to ask is, what is food for? Why do we need to eat? And almost always people will enthusiastically respond with fuel or energy, which is true, but also incomplete. There's a whole other side of nutrition that requires our structural components. But first up here, we are going to start on the energetic side of nutrition. The most readily available form of energy in the human body is glucose. There's an amount of glucose in your bloodstream at all times. The next question I like to ask is, does anybody know or want to guess how many grams of glucose are in the circulation of an average size healthy adult? Guesses range from 50 grams to 3,000 grams and all measures in between. The actual answer is about 4, which here represents about 1 sugar cube. This is about 4 grams of sugar. Now, if that number doubles, if we go from 1 sugar cube worth of sugar in circulation to 2, that's a serious problem. And if that number triples and we have about 12 grams of glucose in circulation, that's a serious medical condition. Make no mistake, elevated blood glucose is a toxin, and no one disputes that. It causes widespread damage, particularly to the microvasculature of your eyes, your kidney, your extremities. There's a reason that diabetes is the leading cause of blindness, kidney failure, amputations, etc. Now, we also need to know that all dietary carbohydrates are either already sugar or they get digested and broken down into sugars. Sugars are things that end in ose: glucose, fructose, lactose, maltose, etc. Now, when blood glucose goes too high, the hormone insulin is secreted by the pancreas and comes out, and its job is to push glucose out of circulation. It's very dangerous and damaging to have glucose hanging out in the bloodstream, so insulin's job is to push it to other places. All cells of the body can use it for energy. If all cells are topped up and they don't need any energy, 2 cells of the body can store glucose in a short-term storage form called glycogen. That's the liver and the muscles. That storage tank, though, is very small. You can store about 100 grams of glucose in your liver and maybe 400 to 500 grams in your muscles. After that, excess energy needs to get converted to a more dense storage form, and that's lipid or fat, and that gets put into your fat tissue. So insulin has a big job in keeping glucose maintained in a nice homeostatic balance. On the opposite side, if glucose goes too low, if that 4 grams of glucose in circulation goes down to about 2, that's also a serious medical problem. That's called hypoglycemia, hypo meaning not enough glucose in circulation. So an opposite hormone, or a counter-regulatory hormone called glucagon, also secreted by the pancreas, comes out, and glucagon's job is to mobilize stored energy. It stimulates the release of some of that glycogen out of the liver and a little bit of the fatty acids out of the fat tissue. Now, this all works well and fine unless we eat in a way that completely dysregulates that beautiful homeostatic balance. So let's talk about some of the things that are happening in our modern Western processed food diet. I like to use Vector cereal as an example because I feel like it's one that people often choose thinking they're making a healthy choice. So we started by pouring out what seemed like a reasonable, normal portion of Vector cereal in a regular size cereal bowl. The first thing one of the kids in the front row said was, I'd be going back for seconds if that was all I got. So I thought I was being generous, but some of the boys in the room thought they would definitely eat more than this. Now, this actually represents 2.5 servings of the serving size that's listed on the side of the box. Now, we weighed it out, we did the math based on the servings and multiplied. And what this represents is 112 grams of carbohydrate, which for visualization purposes looks like this. So this is the amount of carbohydrate being dumped into the digestive system. Now, what's in this bowl of Vector cereal is either already sugar or highly refined and processed carbohydrates that are rapidly broken down into sugars, sometimes even by the enzymes in your saliva. So they're pure glucose sometimes before they even hit your stomach. So this amount of cereal is rapidly dumping a massive influx of carbohydrate into the system. Now, I also asked them about the time. I said, how long do you think it would take you to eat this bowl? They said like 2 minutes. I was generous and said maybe 5. So in 2 to 5 minutes, the speed at which these already refined and processed carbohydrates are hitting the system is really, really, really fast. Now, the next thing we want to do is compare that to what a real food looks like. Now, let's compare that amount of carbohydrate to a basic orange. how many oranges do you think it would take to equal this amount of carbohydrate that's contained in this bowl of Vector cereal? We started with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It takes about 7 large oranges to equal the amount of carbohydrate contained in this one bowl of Vector cereal. Now, bringing the time factor back in, how long would it take them to eat these oranges? I asked the class and they were like, oh, days. And I said, what if I gave you the same amount of time, call it 5 minutes? What's the maximum number of oranges you could eat in 5 minutes if you had to peel them and chew them? And they thought maybe they could get through 2 if they were being really aggressive. So in the same amount of time, we just can't get anywhere near that same load of carbohydrate coming into the system when we just eat real foods. Now, the next question is, if I gave you unlimited time and said, eat as many oranges as you want, how many would you eat before you wouldn't want to eat any more oranges? And the answer was 2, maybe 3 from the hungriest kid in the front row. Thought he might eat 3 oranges before he would just be good and wouldn't want to eat oranges anymore. So again, when we eat real food, there's a natural limit to the appetite. There's a satiety factor involved where we just can't replicate the same amount that comes from a ultra-processed food. Now, speaking of speed of delivery, next we look at some liquid sources of sugar and carbohydrates in the diet. Starting first with juice. So speaking of oranges, what if we already peeled them? What if we removed all the pulp so there was no chewing involved and you could just consume the pure refined juice? This little small bottle, it's 325 milliliters, has 35 grams of carbohydrate. What that looks like is this whole handful, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 sugar cubes worth in chugging just this little bottle. Again, I asked them, how long do you think it would take you to drink that? And they agreed, about 2 seconds. Now imagine if this was my morning cup of coffee and you watched me put not 1, not 2, but 10 sugar cubes worth of sugar in my morning mug of coffee. You would say, Jocelyn, are you okay? What about a vitamin water? That sounds healthy, right? Oh, actually, that's about the same. 10 sugar cubes worth in this bottle right here. What if you need a little pick-me-up? Maybe a Starbucks Frappuccino? The kid said, oh, those are so good. Yeah, of course they're good. This thing has 48 grams of sugar. That's an entire handful in just this one bottle. Or one of the more popular afternoon pick-me-ups, the good old classic Monster Energy. Funny thing was, actually, one of the kids in the front row at this seminar actually came in carrying a Monster. On this bad boy, 55 grams of sugar, an entire 16 sugar cubes in just this one can. Now, keep in mind, that insulin system of managing blood glucose, it'll work for a long time. It'll take an increasingly high amount of insulin to continue to keep blood glucose down in its healthy range, but eventually this system burns out. So the more we hit these buttons and stimulate that carbohydrate system and dump absolutely absurd amounts of glucose into our bloodstream, especially at speed, the sooner that insulin management system burns out. And our cells no longer hear the signal of insulin in order to be able to suck that glucose out of circulation and turn it into energy. Eventually, that's a state called insulin resistance. What that looks like is continuously elevated blood glucose, which now in the US, and Canada's not far behind, have just crossed the 51% mark of adults being either diabetic or pre-diabetic, which is just a different way of saying continuously elevated blood glucose, which is a sign that insulin is no longer able to keep up with the influx of glucose into the bloodstream. Now, let's go back to the vector for a second. Think about the other side of why we need to eat, which is to get building blocks or structural elements to build our bones, our muscles, our tendons, our skin. Every bit of you is built out of something you ate. The reason I like to use vector is I feel like many people choose this because they think it's a healthier or high protein option. And certainly the packaging would make you think so. Let's take a closer look at some real marketing trickery here. So in big, huge letters, high protein. Right here, 13 grams of protein. And there's a tiny little asterisk that takes us to some teeny tiny little print that says, per 55 gram serving of vector with 200 milliliters of skim milk. So now let's go to the tiny print on the side of the box. So in a 55 gram serving of just the cereal itself, there's actually only 5.7 grams of protein. The rest of the protein, 7.3 grams to get us up to the 13 on the front of the box, comes from the milk you're supposed to serve it with. So the cereal itself is actually quite low protein and ridiculously high in carbohydrates and sugar. Now, 5.7 grams of protein, that's actually less than what you would find in one large egg, which is usually 6 to maybe 7 grams of protein. So in one serving of this Vector cereal, if we really wanted protein, you would just eat an egg and drink the milk, and you would save yourself that massive dump of carbohydrate entering your body. Now, people often like to say, well, cereal's cheaper and real food is expensive. So I thought, I'm going to do the math. I actually stopped by the Sobeys grocery store on my way home today to check how much does a 400-gram box of Vector cereal cost these days? Because to be honest, I bought this one years ago and it's been traveling around with me for a long time. So this box of cereal was $7.27. Now, what that works out to for 400 grams times 55 grams per serving, supposedly on the side of the box, it's almost exactly $1 per serving. I then went and looked at the eggs. The most expensive organic free-range eggs I could find were 71 cents per egg. The cheapest, lowest cost eggs I could find are 35 cents per egg. So for the cost, $1 per 55 grams, I could have 2, maybe 3 whole eggs and that glass of milk that's supposed to be included with the Vector, and I would have just as much good protein, energy, vitamins, minerals without a massive lump of, let's see what this is actually made of. Rice, whole grain wheat, starch, and then, oh, surprise, sugar. It's actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different types of sugar. Sugar, corn syrup, blackstrap molasses, honey, malted barley syrup. My rule of thumb is that if sugar is one of the first 3 ingredients, that's a dessert. So Vector cereal is not a meal replacement, as they'd like to say, it's actually just a dessert. After that, we've got soybeans, vegetable oil, soy protein, whole grain oats, rice flour, salt, natural flavors, and then a variety of synthetic vitamins. So we basically have starch, sugar, soy, and vegetable oil. Now, often when I point this out to the kids, they are mad and they go, how can they get away with that? How can they say high protein and 13 grams of protein when what's for sale in this box doesn't contain anything like that? Well, welcome to the shady world of food labeling. This isn't actually sold as a cereal, it's sold as a meal replacement. So because it's supposed to be combined with milk, where it says directions for use, per 55 gram of Vector in a bowl, add 200 milliliters of skim milk. And then it gives you the nutrition facts if you use the milk. So quite ridiculous, quite a lot of fancy marketing that would certainly mislead you into thinking that this is a good choice if you're looking for protein, when it is absolutely not. And you could absolutely just eat an egg, or better, 3 eggs, and drink the glass of milk.